Okay, here is video 4 in our new series updating you on the economics of fiscal policy, and in this video we'll look at the national debt. Well, what is the national debt? It is the total stock of debt that the government owes to the private sector which has not yet been repaid. And in the UK, gross government debt was £1.8 trillion at the end of March 2019. And that's equivalent to about 85% of the annual GDP. So the debt is the stock of unpaid loans. The deficit is the annual difference between government spending and taxation. And the national debt has been built up by successive governments of all political persuasions over many years. Indeed, we've only had 2 years of small budget surplus in the last 25, 30 years or so. And oftentimes the deficit is bigger than GDP growth, and therefore the debt increases as a share of GDP. A key uncertainty, an important question, is how much higher will the debt be after the coronavirus crisis is over. Here's a chart showing the level of debt in the UK measured as a percentage of GDP. And if we go back 15 or 20 years or so, debt was relatively low for the UK at or around 40% of our national output. But then debt spiked much higher very quickly. And this was a consequence of the last recession, where the budget deficit went up to 10% of GDP, and the UK government took on board some of the debts, for example, of the bailed out banks that were nationalised. So debt reached a peak in excess of 85% of our national output. There were some signs that that debt ratio was coming down gradually in the last 3 or 4 years as the budget deficit has come down. But of course we know that government debt will be going up again in the years ahead because of the big fiscal stimulus package designed to prevent the British economy going into a depression. Explain why the budget deficit and the national debt will likely rise so quickly during 2020 and 2021. Well, of course, it's events. It's what's happening to the economy at the moment. We're seeing a steep decline in direct and indirect tax revenues as unemployment goes up, as business profits take a hit, and perhaps GDP in the UK may fall by more than 10% in 2020. Much depends, of course, how quickly the British economy picks up after the worst effects of the pandemic flow through. There's been a huge increase in government spending and lower business taxes as part of the fiscal stimulus or fiscal support package to prevent a depression. Another aspect is that the yield on debt may go up. The government's going to have to issue a lot of new debt to the market, so the supply of debt will go up. That would bring the price of debt down in theory, which would increase the yield on the debt, which again in theory makes debt more expensive to service. The UK government already spends about £600 million a week just on the interest on existing debt. However, I put this in bold at the bottom, the Bank of England, central bank, may step in as a major purchaser of new government debt via an expansion of quantitative easing. So that third point may not be valid. Which countries have the highest national debt in the world as a share of their GDP? I wonder if you know the answer to that question. Well, the answer is, as of 2019, the answer is Japan. Easily the highest debt in the world, 240% of their national output. Huge level of gross government debt. Sudan has joined the 200% club. Greece, as you will know, has a very high level of debt. And all of these countries in this chart have a level of gross public sector debt in excess of 100% of their GDP. In contrast, some countries still have very low national debt. And here are the figures for 2019. Hong Kong and Macau, special administrative regions of China, they have zero government debt according to the official data published by the IMF. But all of these countries shown have a level of national debt below 20% of their GDP. And if you're interested in this kind of topic, it might well be worth exploring the reason why this is the case in more detail. In future videos in fiscal policy, this is video 4, we're going to be thinking about the advantages and disadvantages of a high fiscal deficit. We'll ask the question, does the scale of national debt matter for a country? And we'll go back to the crisis and think about how fiscal policy has been used during the coronavirus economic crisis. We'll also do a special video looking at the impact of tax and how taxation can have an impact both on aggregate demand and also aggregate supply. So there was the use of tax as a supply side policy. And we'll also take a little look at microeconomics, the use of fiscal policy analysis and evaluation to achieve microeconomic objectives. Anyway, thank you for joining in this video on the national debt.